Thank you, Kristen, and thank you everyone on the line for joining today and taking the time out of your busy schedules to learn about building business cases for improving driver safety. Today, we'll be covering the ROI process, and I will interchange ROI, return on investment, with business case, just so that way everyone's clear, and we'll jump right in here. So for the overview of the ROI process, there's multiple stages in building the business case, and those include the pre-pilot business case, and that is when you're deciding to look for a safety program, you want to make sure that before you go out and interact with any of these different safety providers and go through their pilot programs or trial programs, if that's what you're looking to do, you'll want to gather the data on your side first and quantify the figures on your end. And what that'll help you do is when you're building the model and finding those assumptions to dial in, you'll already understand the costs of your fleets and where the risky costs and behavior are. Next is the during the pilot or trial return on investment business case, and that's where you're going to look to apply the results of the trial and pilot program in terms of reductions in costs to the original ROI model you built. And then lastly is the after the pilot ROI model. So when you're deploying a pilot in your fleet and deciding on a safety partner, you'll start to see that the cost trends in the data will shift, and maybe some of the profiles that you started at seeing at the beginning of the ROI process are not there anymore, and new costs have been exposed. So that's why it's important that once you deploy, in order to make sure that your safety partner and yourself get the most return out of your program, you'll want to run the model post-trial about 3 to 6 months, and then at a regular occurrence after that, and so that way you can focus on the bottom line impact and top line impact that the program's having for safety and your fleet. Next is benchmarking and public data. So when you're gathering data about your fleet and your variables, it's oftentimes you'll find that not all of the data is either there or clean or accurate. There may be some gaps missing. So it's important to figure out, if you are missing data, where can you get a benchmark or average source? A lot of it can be available publicly. So FMCSA has government cost data in terms of accident claims and a lot of other metrics about fleets. You can also find a safety partner that does have a historical benchmark database that will have a lot of cost averages and information to fill in the data gaps that you may be missing when going through the business case process. And then thirdly is a team effort. So the whole goal of the business case is for you to really understand the bottom line impact and potential top line impact that a safety program will have on your fleet. But it's also for your safety partner to understand what you're trying to accomplish, what percentage reductions and what costs you want to improve on when going through the program over the course of the program period. And in order to do that, it really does require a team effort, because that way you can hold your safety partner and yourself accountable for achieving those results. So today we'll cover the importance of discovering most costly behaviors in your fleet, the data required to capture the return opportunity in your fleet, the relating your ROI to your business objectives, testing assumptions in the model, and finding the break-even requirements. Oops. So here's the first step of discovering the most costly behaviors. So you want to start big picture and figure out how the overall data trends look in your fleet. And for this example, we'll use the variable set of collision claims in the next few examples as well. Once we get into the data required for the model, you can do this with any variable set that you want to include in the business case. So here is an example of collision claims and trends over time. And it's a graph of all of the costs incurred over time and how they're trending. And so what we see here is that maybe you'll find that if your business is seasonal, you'll see which are the worst seasons for costs. You'll see potential spikes from quarter to quarter in severe accidents that may have happened. And you also, as shown on the right chart, see how the data is trending year over year. So in this case, they're trending downwards, they're becoming a safer fleet, and they do still have a lot of room for opportunity. And this is really the first stage in dialing down the average costs you're incurring and where your benchmark is individually for your fleet. Next, you'll want to get into the growth potential of your current open claims. And that's really finding the open versus closed claims. And what that means is open claims are claims that, for example, if you were in an accident 2 weeks ago and you are looking at the data today, you might have costs on the data records, but not the full cost for the accident. So open claims are likely to incur more costs over time. Closed claims means you're not paying out anymore for those, and they're finished. So what we have here in these charts is an analysis of, in the upper left, bodily injury, property damage on the bottom left, and auto-related workers' comp on the bottom right. And it shows that in bodily injury and the workers' comp, they do have a lot of open claims in this fleet, so there is a large potential for growth and risk of incurring more costs. And so the reason to do this is just to figure out if all your claims are closed out, you might not want to develop the model as much and apply that development factor, which assumes growth. However, if they're fully open, you'll want to factor that into how that's going to look over time from a cost perspective. Next is figuring out location. So this is really to just get a picture of where, if you are going to deploy a pilot program or trial program for one of your safety partners, where to deploy that program. So here we see that Florida and Georgia are incurring the most costs by the state, so that might be good locations to look at for a trial program and test the expected ROI from a safety partner. The other thing that you could do here is normalize by vehicle. So one of the metrics that I've found to be a best practice metric is a per vehicle per year metric. And what that allows you to do is figure out how the costs per vehicle are going to relate to the savings per vehicle and include that in the model. And I'll get into that in building the model and how that becomes more effective in making the business case variable. Lastly, it's really dialing down into the behaviors and how the safety program can directly impact behaviors. So a common theme and misalignment that I see in building these models is that frequency doesn't always correlate to severity. So on the right side here, you see that backed into vehicle, sideswipe, and struck parked vehicle might be the most frequent. So from a safety perspective, or are the most frequent. So from a safety perspective, you may be coaching your drivers to not have those occur, and yet from a cost perspective, that's not where you're spending the most money, and that's not how you impact the bottom line of your safety program. So on the left, when discovering this data, you'll see that struck vehicle in rear, intersection accident, and our vehicle turning left is where the most cost is coming from, and if you coach those behaviors and try to reduce those, you'll actually have the most impact in your bottom line and run a much safer safety program. So moving on to the data required for building the model. So the first question I ask when building a model is, where does every dollar go in an accident? Because that's the most direct impact that the safety program will have on the bottom line. And what I've found and what we've found is that the primary data sets that answer that question are the auto liability, the auto-related workers' comp, and the accident-related vehicle repairs. So auto liability is bodily injury and property damage, workers' comp is typical workers' compensation, and the vehicle repairs would be bent metal and anything accident-related in terms of repair. Those are the most basic core variables, and that's where you'll want to start when building the business case. And again, dialing those down to the per vehicle per year metric is important, because then you can see over time how that's reducing and also correlate the costs directly to the savings impact of the safety program. There's other variables. So safety programs do have an impact on fuel and repairs savings, and that's due to the risk profiles and behavioral change of the drivers. So when you're not hard braking, speeding, cornering too fast, following too close and having to make abrupt swerving maneuvers, over time that adds up and saves in fuel costs and maintenance and repair costs because you're not spending on new tires, you're not spending on suspension, engine-related stress, or extra fuel from acceleration or speeding. And those are the other two variable sets that I would include in the model. The third piece is relating the ROI to your top line savings. So a lot of fleets want to see if we can save and break even and have more to spend on the fleet, where do we want to put that? So you could look at budget flexibility, you could look at job preservation, positive media, and we'll get into a few more examples on the next slide. Lastly, it's really any data set related to risk, so that could be labor and operational savings, and it is up to your discretion which variable sets you want to include, but the importance there is quantifying the cost before going and looking at a safety program that could meet those expectations. A few other factors would be deductible. So if you're self-insured, this would not apply, but if you did have an insurance deductible, you'll want to include that when you're discovering those overall cost trends that we looked at in the first few slides, because that does have an impact on the bottom line savings. Next is development factor, which we went over, and that's really where the growth risk of costs comes into play. And then time frame is another very important piece of the model. So the more time you have and more data you have available before the implementation of any safety program, the better, because that'll smooth any of those severe cost trends over time and better predict the savings you'll have when deploying the post program. Next is the break-even calculation. So this narrows the model and business case back down again. The break-even calculation is what we always do to figure out what variable sets need to reduce at what percentages to achieve an ROI and bottom line results. And usually that can be found in those collision savings, and the rest is icing on the cake. So when dialing down the other variables, they may be much more conservative. You do really want to find a estimate of what percentage you need to achieve in the core data sets in your business case in order to break even. And then the next step of it would be finding the best practice. So if you had a best practice program and implemented it as well as you can and get, say, 25% breaks even, say you get 60% results, the next piece is how does that help from a top line perspective. So maybe my business objective is I have a driver turnover problem and I need to save more jobs, or I have a contractual business and I need more contract wins. You can actually use the savings in this model to apply that to top line results and how that'll help you save in other areas or use that ROI to improve your safety program. And what that does is it holds your safety partner and yourself accountable for getting those best practice results and really helping your fleet. And another one of those could be driver recognition, so you can use some of the savings to actually reward drivers for being safer and solve a lot of those issues. So here is an example of testing assumptions in the model and also that pilot stage ROI process. So once you have the cost dialed down and the per vehicle per year metrics for the variable sets you want to include in the model, during a pilot or trial program, your safety partner should have key performance indicators. And so what these are the leading indicators that if you see the results in the leading indicators, the lagging indicators, which are the costs and variable sets you're trying to improve, will follow. And so what this is showing is that in this program example, if you were to improve the frequency and severity metrics of the program by 41% and 44%, that will correlate to a 48% savings in your claims costs and a 23% improvement in the frequency of those costs. So not only are you getting rid of that severe accidents, those one-time occurrences, all of the less severe accidents you're reducing at a significant rate as well. So that full circles back into the business case, because you can actually say, if in my pilot I'm experiencing a 20 to 30% severity and frequency savings, then I can apply a 20 to 30% reduction in my claims and see what that looks like from a real result standpoint. And lastly, here's what we want from a best practice safety program in terms of the business case. So what you should see post-pilot, and when you find, or when you review the business case multiple times at a regular recurrence, you'll see that cost trends shift and the per vehicle per year metrics in your data sets should decrease. So on the left side here, you have the drop in the per vehicle per year costs and frequency. And so that shows that over time, those are being reduced as much as possible, and that's really the main thing you want to drive. And then on the right, the other benefit of a best practice safety program and the effects of the business case is when you do that pre-cost and claims assessment to post, you can start narrowing in on the behaviors that are costing you the most and getting those out of the equation. So on the pre-accident causes, you'll see there's a variety of causes here at a variety of cost factors. And the post-accident, there's much less behaviors that are risky and much less cost associated. So that's really what you want to see out of the business case and the program. And when you run the business case multiple times throughout the entire decision process, that'll give you new direction to coach on costly behaviors and drive the bottom line impact. So lastly, to summarize, the best practice ROI process will help you quantify the bottom and top line savings for you and your driver safety partner. It'll also allow you to work as a team with your safety partner to discover the most achievable saving estimates, which is essentially the most realistic cost reduction percentages that you can apply to the bottom line. And then you'll also know what needs to be accomplished to break even in what variable sets. So if that's purely collisions, you'll know that percentage. If it is fuel and maintenance, you'll also have estimates on the reductions in those variables. And lastly, you'll be able to continuously update the data so that you can find new focus and new costs that weren't there before to improve on and impact the bottom line. Now I'll open up to questions, and Kristen can read those off.
Okay, thanks, Joe. All right, let's see. How do I know the savings in fuel and maintenance is from the program and not other initiatives we are doing in my company?
That's a good question. I get that one a lot. So fuel and maintenance are much harder to correlate to bottom line savings from a safety program. What I typically do is when you deploy the pilot program or even full fleet, it's good to take a control group of vehicles that do not have the program implemented and those that do in the same location. And so that way you can compare the control group to the location with the program implemented and see what the cost factor difference is with just the program being the variable in that situation. Everything else should remain static, so even if you have multiple programs in place, as long as there's a control group and a group with the safety program, that should give you a good estimate of what the savings impact will be.
Do you use any other variables for the model besides per vehicle per year numbers?
Yes, so we've found that per vehicle per year works the best just because the time frame is always hard to quantify. So if you have a yearly time frame, that's helpful. But we also can use cost per mile. We can use any variable that you track internally. And it's really, as long as you can match the costs over time to the savings over time, then the variables can be dynamic in what we choose to track.
Okay. Do you provide an online ROI calculator for prospects?
So at this point, we prefer the custom ROI model process because given the amount of data sets that could have an impact on the ROI, as well as helping dial in the cost and become that safety partner, we find that the online ROIs have a limited amount of variables and show limited value as opposed to that custom ROI. So we really strive to be that safety partner and have the best practice results from the custom ROI model. And internally, we have a team to do that. So a lot of best practice safety partners will be able to build that custom ROI for you and help you through the process.
Okay, great. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any questions that you would like to ask after this presentation, this is Joe's contact information, and we hope that you can join us for our next webinar. Thank you.
The leader has turned lecture off and your line has been unmuted. To unmute your line,